Now, our next guest is someone I'm really looking forward to talking to. We have James, who works at PlanetScale, which is an amazing company. I'm actually a huge fan of their products. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we're going to be talking about how databases fit into a serverless world. And I think, this is a really interesting topic because today we're focused on security, how to make things more secure. There's a lot of benefits to security in a serverless world, I think. There's a lot of interesting side effects of building things in a serverless way. And databases are a huge part of that. And so with that being said, let's get James on the live stream here. James, hello, my friend.
How's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's kind of wild that I think, technically we've actually met before. I don't know if you remember it, like years ago at a KCDC.
Yeah, a really long time ago. I was going to say, it was like at KCDC, right?
And then I don't know if you knew, but I was at Auth0 during the Okta acquisition. And then you left before, like literally, I think like the week before we had our like meet and greet with the two DevRel teams.
We that's unfortunate timing. Yeah. I actually still have my Okta jacket on today. So
I saw that. Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, one of our teammates, I won't at Auth0, I won't call them out specifically, was like devastated because you were his idol, but devastated that you left before he got a chance to meet you. So you have a lot of respect, especially in the Auth0 family, and I imagine general community as well.
There are so many great people that work at Auth0, that work at Okta, that work at all these great places, man. It's a small world out there, especially in the tech and security space. There's not that many people into this stuff. So it's part of the reason why it's fun doing something like this, getting to connect with people and talk with them and just like, make friends, I guess, over the internet as best as you can.
Yeah. Well, it's been like, we have to, right, over the last couple of years, because it used to be like the speaker circuit, right? You see all the people at conferences and stuff in the last couple of years. There's been almost none of that, which this year seems to be picking up. I don't know if you've applied and planning on speaking at conferences coming up, but I've got a few on the books that I'm looking forward to.
Actually, I haven't really done much yet. I have been dying to, though. I've been stuck in my house here for the last 2 years. I have barely done anything. I am going to go on my first work trip, though, in the last couple of years, next month, which I'm very excited about. So I'm actually going to leave California, which feels scary to me now, but it's going to happen. So
what's the work trip for? Is it like a team offsite?
Going to be heading out to Boston to Snyk headquarters, which is in Boston for the first time, meeting a bunch of coworkers there in person that I've never met in person before, just only doing the Zoom thing. So very much looking forward to that. But how about you? Have you been getting out of the house lately?
Yeah, I did. KCDC is the one conference I've done in person. That was back in September, which went really, really well. And it was incredible to see people in person because I've made lots of friends the past couple of years online, and it's just different. It's special when you get to hang out in person. So that was cool. And then a couple of conferences coming up. So there's one in Europe, which I'm really excited about, IJS, International JavaScript Conference. And then there's Render ATL in Atlanta. That like last year it was in September around the same time as KCDC. That's the biggest FOMO I've had for a conference. Like the pictures and videos and stuff I saw from the conference, I was like, I have to be there next year. So I'm looking forward to that one. And then Remix Conf in Utah in April or May, I think. So that'll be a fun one too.
Sounds amazing. Hopefully I will get to see you at some of these things in the near future.
Agreed.
But yeah, maybe to get started, we got a lot of people watching the stream right now. By the way, shout out to you. If you are watching the stream, this stream, we will answer literally whatever you ask us. If you drop a question in there, either I will answer it or I will send it to James. So don't be shy. Post in the channels and we will get your question on the screen. But with that being said, James, maybe you could give the audience a little bit of your background, what sort of stuff you're into. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about PlanetScale and then get into our topic of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of go by a tagline of developer, speaker, teacher. And I've done some combination of those professionally for about 10 years. So I started my career out in evangelism at Microsoft, did software development and architecture at FedEx, went to Auth0 where I was there for just under 2 years as a developer advocate, and then joined PlanetScale in November, which I feel like I've been here a long time, but it's really short. Someone's commenting on the queue on the, I've got the mirrored problem too, the queue in the background.
Here we go. Yeah. So Laurent needs to know this. I love that queue printed on your wall. What's the story there?
It's really not that exciting. So Q is actually my middle initial. It's Quentin, and there's a particular reason why I leaned into that. There's a football player named James Quick who played at Louisville and then went to the NFL and dominates SEO from like ranking websites and NFL stats and stuff. I don't even know if they still play, but anyway, SEO just wasn't there for just James Quick. But if you search James Q Quick, um, SEO is pretty good, and I can have socials on everything because you rarely ever find two Qs back to back in any kind of handle. So it gave me a little bit of uniqueness.
The things we have to do for SEO,
Yeah.
terrible. I always equate that to like, you have a cool scar and someone asks, oh, how'd you get that scar? It must have been pretty awesome. In my case, I have one on my finger. People ask about it and I tell them, oh, actually, I was opening a can of dog food with a thing and the edge was really sharp and it sliced me super deep. And now I have this cool looking scar, but there's no great story behind it. It's pretty sad.
I had something similar. I forgot what it was. And but it's something, sheet metal. It's, we've got these outside heat lamps. And so the top of it is like this really thin sheet metal. And I like sliced the mess out of it just like that. And I couldn't stop it from bleeding. It didn't hurt that bad. It was super annoying. Anyway.
Now our audience has a lot of important questions here, James, before we get into things. So what was your first programming language? We need to know.
Yeah. First programming language was Java. So in college, that was 101. And then 201 was C++. Went back to Java, did .NET at Microsoft. And now I do primarily JavaScript. I was honestly like really scared of JavaScript for a long time because it was like the free flowing, do whatever you want type thing. But I am 100% bought into the JavaScript ecosystem now.
So you all heard it here first. James Q Quick does not endorse writing Java code. He prefers you use JavaScript. That's what I'm taking away from this.
That's where I am now. But I did several years professionally of Java at FedEx as well. So it treated me well.
And finally, to appease these watchers, any question, dog or cats? What do you prefer?
Can I go and get my dog and raise her up here? So
it's confirmed. He's a dog guy.
Yes.
It's confirmed. There we go.
Lily is sleeping on the couch. I won't pick her up, but she's right beside me.
All right, now we obviously have a lot of people in chat asking silly questions, which is great. Keep them coming. But let's talk about serverless and databases for a minute, and let's talk about PlanetScale too. So first of all, what is PlanetScale? They're the company you work for, but what do they actually do?
Yeah, so I think one of the taglines is like the database for developers, which I think is really, really applicable. And it's the reason, like the biggest reason why I'm here, to be honest, is the features that we have specifically for developers that we're talking about. But it's basically a managed service of database service on top of MySQL. So there's a middle layer called Vitess, which has powered things like YouTube and like other super, super high scale companies and databases. And so because of that, Vitess is super powerful. There's lots of scaling involved there. And then there's some cool developer-centric features. But at the core, it's a MySQL database. But one of the developer-centric features that I think is like one of the best conversation starters is the idea of branching in PlanetScale. So there's lots of ex-GitHub employees at PlanetScale. So there's lots of GitHub influence, I think, in our mentality. And you can create branches for your database. So if I've, got a database I'm working on, I want to copy that schema over and do some testing on it's basically a separate database. I can create a new branch just like I would inside of a GitHub repo, for example, as a developer. And then to merge that back into a production branch, you need to go through a deploy request. So you have to go through and have an approval to get that schema change merged back into your production branch. So it's got like, I don't know, a lot of mentality and support for developers and developer experience.
So I have to just give a shout out. Like I rarely would do this, but PlanetScale has an amazing team, including the CEO, Sam, who's like super amazing. And I've personally used PlanetScale a lot, like for building demos and experimenting things. And like, I absolutely love it. I think it's super next level. It's really cool. So if you're watching this stream and you haven't used it, I personally cannot recommend it highly enough. To me, actually, we have a comment here. PlanetScale looks super cool. Is it easy to use from Heroku? I would actually go as far as to say, I think Heroku's done a great job of making like platform as a service really easy. I feel like PlanetScale has done the same sort of thing with databases. So definitely check it out for sure.
Yeah. I think in comparison to Heroku, both really good for that sort of thing. I don't know if the question was asking, would you host PlanetScale from Heroku? If that was the case, PlanetScale would actually be the host. So it would be like a managed thing from PlanetScale, which is just MySQL underneath the hood.
So let's talk about serverless, James. For anyone who's watching, not familiar with the concept, just like give us a quick, paragraph description.
Yeah. So I think there's the misconception to start that serverless means no service. It's not the case. It's just really what it comes down to is we as developers don't have to care about the server. We don't have to provision a server. We don't have to maintain a server. We don't have to update and patch. And I've been like at FedEx, like that was the stuff that our teams did, right? Was every month we would take it down so we could do a patch or whatever it was. So serverless is just this idea that you don't have to worry about that stuff at all, really at a highest level from a developer's perspective. And then I think the important part of that, or the most relevant part for us as developers now, and this is kind of like serverless and Jamstack and like modern web dev, it's never been easier for me to create and host a full stack application. Like it's wild how many tools there are to make it as easy as possible. When I think about, going from a framework like, or library, depending on who wants to debate about it, but something like React to then things like Next.js and Gatsby, Svelte and SvelteKit, these extra layers on top of a framework that enable you to take advantage of serverless functions where you write code, don't have to worry about provisioning a server again. None of that you have to worry about. You just write code and it gets run on a server and managed for you in serverless functions. Gives me now the ability to just like create full stack applications and frameworks that I'm comfortable with using all the different tools probably that you've already covered today, because there's so many different products that specialize in certain things that I can then incorporate into my application, and I can go and build that stuff. And most importantly, like also importantly, is like I can do that for free. Like everything has a free tier. So as a developer, like if I have a SaaS idea, like I want to go and build a product, one, I can do it quickly. I can leverage powerful tools that already exist. I can deploy that thing. And to start, like most of them have really good free tiers. So I don't even have to pay to see if I have something before it starts to scale, and then maybe pay to host or whatever the different features are that I need.
I'm a huge serverless fan myself, and part of the reason why I think is just because, like, honestly, I know that as Snyk, as a company, we cater to the DevSecOps crowd. Like, we're huge about like how do we get developers and ops people like more into the security? How do we make security easier for them? But quite frankly, it's even easier if you just don't have to worry about infrastructure at all, right? Like,
Yep.
if you don't need to be running EC2 instances or worried about maintaining VPCs and all these things, I feel like a lot of the time it just serverless infrastructure can just be a lot simpler. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah. I mean, wholeheartedly. Like it's so emphatically easy to get started. It's really just wild. Like I feel spoiled. And there's lots of, details that come along with it once you start diving in. And there's some differences between like a regular fully hosted node application. There's a couple of small limitations and things, but just to get started and build a product, like there's never been a better time to be a developer.
Absolutely. So this is, I think the topic for today is really interesting, which is like, how do databases fit into a serverless world, right? And I think part of the reason it's really interesting is because if you're building something and you're using like Lambda as a backend or whatever it is, like you have serverless functions on Azure or what have you, your entire application is essentially ephemeral, right?
Hmm.
Because maybe a request comes into some URL and that's getting kicked off by some routing layer to spin up a serverless function, which is going to process a request and spit back a response, right? And I think because everything's really ephemeral, the question is like, how do databases fit into this? So I have a bunch of questions I would love to just sort of throw at you,
Yeah,
semi-rapid fire here about this,
go for it.
that will hopefully be interesting to the audience too. So first question, uh, what does the security model look like in this world? If I have a serverless application and I have a database running, like using PlanetScale, for example, what do I need to be worried about there? Do I need to, I mean, obviously I'm not going to have a MongoDB database set up without, any credentials or something like that. But like, what are some practical security considerations you should be thinking about when you're using serverless architecture?
Yeah, there may be like a follow up to this that I don't address, but I think from just a security perspective, it's really basically the same, right? Like you're not going to share your connection string, right? So you have private connection strings. In PlanetScale, you'll have those associated with each individual branch. So you think of them as like their own separate individual databases. So you have separate connection strings. One of the cool things from a don't mess things up accidentally perspective is you can't push schema changes directly to your production branch. So you have some protection against yourself. So you have to go through that deploy request process. Don't share your connection strings, put them in environment variables, but in the serverless world, and especially in a framework like Next.js, or there's a bunch of other ones that are becoming really hot. I just did a stream with Redwood.js earlier. Because of the serverless function capability, you have code that maybe doesn't seem like it's running on a server because I'm not having to do a bunch of things around maintaining a server, but they're running on a server, which is able to keep a secret, something we talked a lot about at Auth0, where you can have environment variables that other people don't have access to. Those environment variables are only accessible on the actual server that the code is run on. And then you've got basically the same relationship that you would have had before, right? Where you have a front end application, even if it's in the same code base and the same framework, you've got your front end making API requests to a back end. Now, there's probably, depending on your needs, like some sort of auth and JWT or whatever. So you're tracking who the user is if you need to. And then it's basically like proxying through your API backend to then use that connection string to connect to your database. So from a security perspective, it's kind of the same thing that we would have done beforehand. I think I lost you for a second. I think you're on mute.
Oh, whoops. There we go. I forgot I have myself muted.
No worries.
I was going to say, what about other considerations? Like if you're running on AWS, would you be using something like a VPC here? Or is that not as relevant when you're building things serverlessly and you have these functions running independently?
VPC, virtual
private cloud. Like if you have like all of your resources in the same like local area network, essentially, something like that.
Yeah, I probably can't speak to that as much specifically myself. So, I mean, I guess that would maybe get more specific into needs. Like some companies only want their things accessible within a certain network, right? So you could do that sort of thing. I don't know the ins and outs of AWS because I am privileged with all the tools that abstract that away from me. So I actually don't have a great answer to that, to be quite honest.
I think that's totally great. I think it's just an interesting concept, right? Like where do you draw the security boundaries, I guess? I think another question is like when you're building serverless apps, and obviously databases are critical to just about anything you build. How does it work in terms of like connection pooling? I know that might be a weird question, but like I'm very familiar with, hey, I'm building this web application. I have a Postgres or MySQL database, and I'm pretty used to like establishing a connection pool and saying, hey, I've got a pool of 100 connections or whatever it is that my web apps across however many servers are going to talk to, grab a connection, talk to the database, do stuff with it, and then relinquish that. Like, how does that work on the scaling side, on the latency side, things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to kind of, someone commented, I've seen James everywhere. This is my third stream, by the way, today. Like it just happened to turn out that way, which has been a blast.
Third time's the charm, they say.
I know this is the best one by far. I shouldn't say that because one was my personal podcast, but anyway. So with the connection pooling, that is one of the problems that some people hit with serverless. So like you mentioned, when people hit these serverless functions, they spin up, they do their thing, and they go away. They're ephemeral, so they're not long lived, which is what we're used to having. If you're running like a full node server, it's going to be awake the whole time. It's going to maintain those connections to a database, and then the connections are just going to be used on incoming requests. So one of the potential problems that people have is kind of exhausting or hitting a limit with how many concurrent connections they can have to their database. This is one of the things that PlanetScale, like one of the reasons why PlanetScale is very apt to handle a serverless environment is because, and like, I don't know what the real threshold is, but like we talk about like infinite connections that you can have. And I think on the free tier, it's like you can have 1,000 concurrent connections. And the reason is like, if a bunch of people hit your application, it's spinning up a serverless function instance for each one of those, which means a new connection. So you could go through an immense scale at that point from a ton of people hitting it and potentially hit those limits of total number of connections. So with PlanetScale specifically, it can, I mean, you've got limits based on a free tier, but in theory, like most likely you're not going to have any issue with overall number of connections that you're creating inside of those serverless function instances.
I love that. Here's another viewer question. Potato Scream says, do you have any information on these statistics in databases like Mongo or MySQL?
I do not. And this is one of the things I talked about this earlier. Someone asked me, like, when you went to PlanetScale, did you know much about databases? And honestly, the answer is no. But the cool thing is, for me, it's just another learning opportunity in my career. So Auth0 was the same way. I knew nothing about Auth before I got there. I knew very little about databases, like on a detailed level, before coming here. And one of the things I'm excited about is not only learning about PlanetScale and Vitess and MySQL, but also learning more specifically about how that compares with MongoDB and Fauna and all these different database services. Because I don't want to tell people, like, you should use PlanetScale because we're the best. Like, I want to have a conversation to intelligently understand what people need and want, and help them make the right decision. So I think it's a big learning opportunity for me to be able, in a few months from now, maybe have a better answer to a specific question like that.
So here's another question I sort of had in my list. So before before we hopped on the stream, I was thinking to myself, like, what are some really interesting things around databases in the serverless world that I personally really want to know about? Also, hold on one second. We have a special stream guest. One moment. My dog Dandelion decided to come in. So everyone say hello to Dandelion.
Nice.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
She's obviously very interested in serverless
And
database
databases and
stuff.
serverless, yeah.
Those are the keywords that she responds to. That's her nickname now. But anyway, so before I lost my train of thought there, one of the other really interesting things I was curious about, especially as it pertains to like using databases with serverless stuff, but outside of connection pooling, how big of an issue is it to actually roll out schema changes and things? That's one of the things I think people generally have a lot of problems with, even in like non-serverless instances where you're not worried about managing hundreds of functions, and maybe you can potentially more atomically like roll out updates to a particular server. Could you just talk through that a little bit and give the audience a little bit of information about how that works?
Yeah. So I think, like, my experience at FedEx has so many realistic comparisons of how some things are managed and how things can be better with tools that we have today. So if we were to make database changes at FedEx, I worked in sorting stuff, so it was really only application stuff that ran during sortation time periods, which is mostly at night. So it'd be 11 at night to 3 or 4 in the morning, and it would sort through 750,000 packages, like a pretty intense application, but only for that time. So we're kind of lucky in that sense that, like, we could kill a whole application during the day and update schemas or update, ship new code or whatever it was, which is what we would have to do. But if you've got a business that's like 24/7 and you don't have downtime, like that can be a big hit. And we've seen it. Like, people have probably been seen on Twitter, hey, our product is going to be down tomorrow from blah, blah, blah to blah, 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 as we're doing whatever it is, right? Or we've probably experienced that at some point. If you could avoid that, that would be great. So one of the really cool things that Vitess, which is the underlying technology that PlanetScale sits on top of, enables is this zero downtime schema migrations. So we talked about that idea of deploy requests to get schema changes into a production branch. When that happens, and this is like mind blowing to me, having like tried to do replication and stuff in the past, but it creates a ghost database where it copies over that schema. It's copying over the data to that ghost database, while at the same time leaving the source database running as is. So you can have your application still pinging it, hitting it, writing stuff, whatever. All of those changes are also being streamed over to this new ghost database. Once it's all caught up and the schema is like migrated, then you just switch to the ghost database and then drop or I don't know what happens with the other, probably drop at some point, but you just switch over, right? So it's all this magic that's going on behind the scenes to, like, not only copy data, but also replicate real time as it's coming in. And then you just swap over, and you've got, what is essentially behind the scenes, a new database, but it's transparent to you and your application. So the zero downtime schema migrations, you can make the changes, and once it finishes all that stuff, it's ready to go.
Amazing. And when I played around with PlanetScale in the past, and I think you mentioned this earlier, one of the most interesting things to me as well was like the forking concept, like that you can fork your database. Could you explain a little bit about like what that means and like what are some of the practical uses of that in the real world?
Yeah. So right now the branching is for schema only. So if you create a branch from a branch, everything is a branch, just like your code is. You think about, you'd probably have like a main branch that is your production branch. A production branch you can't push schema changes directly to. So you have a production branch, you create a branch from that for dev or James's dev branch or whatever you want to do. And most likely what I would do is like I would create that branch, create a connection string to that branch specifically, because everything they're basically separate databases. And then I could do my testing and connect to that specific branch while I'm testing. I can decide that this stuff now looks good, create the deploy request, and have that stuff merged. So you get into this like workflow that developers are fairly comfortable with, right? Because that's what we do a lot with GitHub, or just like source control in general, not specifically GitHub. And then the other piece of it that I think is like fascinating is the potential to tie that into your DevOps like CI/CD pipeline. To where if I like push code to a dev branch or a staging branch or maybe just any branch, if I push code to that branch, have some GitHub actions kick off behind the scenes that will create a new branch of your database, seed it with some data, and then run your test against it and have all that stuff be automated. Like that, I think is pretty revolutionary, to spin up and spin down these instances of your databases that you can just do your test with and know exactly what all information is in there and what all tests, like assuming you write good tests, they pass. You should be in a pretty good position to go ahead and do that schema migration to your production branch.
Amazing. I think that is so incredibly useful. Like as someone who's been building web apps forever, you know, like I think that adds a ton of flexibility and also just like redundancy, right? Like it makes it
Mhm.
easier to experiment with things. If you break something, you can always roll it back. Like I feel like that's incredibly helpful, honestly.
Yep, agreed.
So
That's pretty cool stuff.
I know we're running short on time here, but like, what are a few things you'd really like any developers, any security people watching the stream to take away from this talk? What are some pro tips you could give them about either building serverless apps, security, working with databases like PlanetScale? Like, what would you recommend?
General advice is just go build stuff. Like it's such a fun ecosystem to be in, like the modern web tooling, the different products that are out there. I mean, obviously part of me is like, go try PlanetScale, and like seriously, go try PlanetScale, good or bad. I'd love to hear feedback if people have any. But I just think, like I said earlier, there's been no better time to be a developer and want to build a product. I think a cool example of that, which is kind of wild, is Wordle. Right? I don't know if you play, I play, and it sold for $1 million. And like I've kind of behind the scenes been working on a clone to do some content around. And it's not that hard, right? Like it's a thing you could sit down and build out in a couple of days. But that's a product now that was worth $1 million to the New York Times. So yeah, my advice is like go out and build stuff. Like there's so many technologies and products out there that make it easier for you to build the thing that can be your special thing. Like most of these products are taking care of the stuff that you have to have, whereas or that gives you the ability to work on the stuff that can make a product special.
I love that. So just go build stuff. A great departing piece of advice. James, thank you so much for being here with us for the big fix. It's been a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Hopefully we can get together and see each other in person sometime over the next few months here. And thank you again.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks for having me.